Hey guys, it's Joe, the Gtv6 guy. Hey, I wanted to do a real quick video. I was at the gym tonight and I was thinking to myself, I was thinking about a couple things I need to do with my engine block for my Gtv6. And it got me thinking about how I kind of got to this point where I had to pull the engine. And it's something I think a lot of GTV6 owners and also Milano owners or 75 owners with the Busso V6, whether it be a 2.5 or a 3.0, something a lot of us will encounter or we have encountered. If not already, then we will. And that's oil leaks. Places the engine will leak, potential oil leaks, spots, and places that are overlooked. Things that guys might think are a spot where it's leaking, but it's really coming from somewhere else. So I wanted to address that, a couple things. Because my engine is basically, I've got almost a bare block, this would be a good time to show some of you guys the potential places where these V6 engines in our GTV6s and Milanos, or 75 if you're in Europe, where you have potential issues and you might overlook. So first things first is you got your upper pan. This would be mounted to the block, and then you got your lower pan, of course, and this would be facing down towards the road. Of course, here you would have your drain plug. You've got your copper crush washer. Beneath that, of course, you would have. This doesn't because it's not there, but you would have a gasket that would be sandwiched in between these two oil pans. Now, just remember, best case scenario, if your engine has not been rebuilt, best case scenario, your Busso V6, and I'm talking about a 12 valve engine, not a 4-cammer, but a 2-cam engine. Best case scenario, that engine was made in '88. So that is, as of right now, 31 years old, or going on 31 years old. So 31 years, that's a lot of time for these gaskets to dry out, crack, wear out with age, heating, cooling cycles. So there's just a lot of potential there for age to take its toll on the gaskets that, number one, mate to the bottom of the block and to the what would be the top of this pan, and then the gasket that would be sandwiched in between this pan and then the lower pan. So that is potentially one place, and I almost guarantee that is a place that most of you guys are having issues. I know I did for sure. And one thing I noticed is if you are having some pan leaking and your pan is wet and it's got wet oil, place to check if you can. It's hard to see, but if you get up under there, and it would be if you were if you were laying on the ground looking up, if I'm on my back looking up at the car, check these mounting bolts back here, because I find that these two right here, they're very hard to spot, and they're hard to get to, and they're hard to see. But if the bolts are loose, or in this case, if sometimes they can work their way out and they're not there. And if they're not there, you are going to lose oil from in between here very easily. So that is one potential place I can tell you that keep an eye on some of these bolts, because they're hard to see, they're hard to get to, they're hard to spot, and you gotta get the car way up in the air, and you've got to get down under there with a good light source and get up in there. And like I said, make sure these are tight, number one, but not too tight, because of course if you over torque these, you're just going to damage the gasket, and then you're going to have a leak anyway. But make sure, number one, they're there, because I have seen where these have backed out and fallen out. And then, of course, you've got a mating surface that is doing nothing for you. So that's a potential spot. Other than that, these, your lower pan and your upper pan gaskets, you could probably swap those in the car. You probably don't have to take the engine out to get to those. So, you're going to have to do some work to get to them. You're going to have to take off a lot of stuff, but potentially you don't have to pull the engine. To be fair, the amount of work to strip everything off around to get that out of the bottom of the car, you'd probably have less time just pulling the engine out. So in my experience, it's just best pull the engine. Take you about 3-4 hours all told. So let's move over to the block. And let me grab something to point with and a screwdriver. And I'm going to try to, we'll try to show you guys this. So here's our Busso V6 3-liter block. So of course, up here you would have your, hold on, where are we? There we are. So you're going to have your front seal, and that's actually going to be on a cover that goes right in this surface. So one thing you want to check is your front seal, which would be sealing the crank right here. Generally, from what I understand and what I've seen, these don't really go bad. You probably won't have an issue here. The one a lot of people fear, of course, is the rear main seal. So if we come around to the back of the block and look down there, if I can, there you go. So your rear main seal is right here. It goes around the back of the crankshaft here. So this is the rear main seal here, and goes basically around the circumference of the crank. Now this is the one everyone freaks out. And if they have any kind of leak that's at the back of the engine, this is the one they always suspect. And they always think it's a rear main seal. Now, it very well could be, but you have two other culprits back here that it's just as likely that it could be. And that is these guys right here. It is this one here and this one over here. And these are what they call the cigarette seals. And they are basically a long, skinny rubber seal that runs down along this this mount here. This is actually part of the rear journal crank mount. And this is also a mating surface for the oil pan. So the oil pan would mount right across here. So there'd be a gasket, oil pan. So you've got these two cigarette seals which run down inside of here. They're basically, think of them like a cigarette. Now, these are basically like a hard rubber, and these are known to fail, crack, and oil will basically work its way through the seal, the cigarette seal, and then out the back side, and then exit the engine. So that is a culprit that a lot of people don't think about or overlook, because in all honesty, even if you have a little bit of experience with engines, if you're getting oil leakage from the back of your block, you immediately are thinking rear main seal, because especially if you're in the US, if you worked on small block Fords and Chevys or Mopar engines, if you had a oil leak at the back of the engine, 10 times out of 10, it was the rear main seal or the crank seal. Now with these aluminum Busso V6 engines out of our Alphas, we've got those two little cigarette seals that are just as likely to be the culprit. So in any case, if any of those things are bad, you got to pull the engine. It's just easier to do it. I suspect you could, if you really wanted to and you're really motivated, you could do it with the engine in the car, maybe. But why would you? The amount of headache involved in that, you could have probably pulled the engine and put it back in 2 or 3 times. So again, if you have an oil leak you can't identify, and it's coming from the back of the block, and you suspect it's the rear main seal, it very well could be those cigarette seals. But like I said, they're just as much of a pain to get to. So if you're going to replace one, replace all of them. In this case, over here, let me move this guy out of the way. So in that case, you would get something like this. And this is your gasket set. So this has got every gasket seal that you're going to need. And actually, you can see here, here's your cigarette seals right here, as well as your oil pan seals, your front cover seals, things like that. And then, where did I put them? I don't know. I had a couple. I had the rear, or I had the main seals. I put them somewhere. I've got everything boxed up. And then I was going to show you the front cover, but that's boxed and put away as well. But anyway, the front cover would be another culprit. as far as potential leaking areas, because that front cover basically mounts right here, and then it has a mounting surface across here for that what would be the top oil pan to mate to. So that's also, of course, that's another escape point for oil to work its way past. So you want to make sure this surface here has got a new clean gasket. Also, you'll have your front crank main seal, but from what I understand in my research is that is not a very that is not a known failure point for the seals on this engine. I know mine was in perfect condition when I pulled it off. It was no big issue. And even, like I said, the rear seal on this seems to be okay. So, you know, what I found out is what I thought was the rear crank seal or the cigarette seals. Actually, what it was, there was actually these two bolts right here, which the oil pan would have been mounted to. These two bolts had actually backed themselves out a little bit, and it allowed basically the oil to work its way past the gasket. So that is something you want to definitely check. And not only was the gasket fried and cracked and dried out anyway and needed to be replaced, just having those two bolts back themselves out just a little bit, it just basically freed up the pressure on that gasket enough that oil could basically at that point just flow out almost at will. So like I said, it had started off as a little bit of a leak, and I suspected a rear main seal. And then it got worse and worse as those two bolts kind of backed themselves out just over time. And it got to the point where I thought the rear main was gone. As it turned out, the rear main is perfect. The cigarette seals are perfect. It was just those two bolts backed out. So like I said, you know, check those things. If you find that you've got some bolts that have backed themselves out around the oil pan, throw a little Loctite on them, just to safeguard those things kind of backing themselves out. And then if you are suspecting that it is your rear main or your cigarette seals, you know, you can pull the engine. And like I said, all in, pulling the engine and getting to the stage it is on the engine stand, I may be into it 6 hours. So it's really not that bad. It's just a matter of maybe going out to your garage every night for a half hour, 45 minutes or an hour, pulling wires, hoses, getting them out of the way, and then having a buddy, hopefully with an engine lift, or if you have one yourself, then it's just a matter of getting it out. And I will tell you, when you do take it out, remove the engine bell that's mounted to the back of the block. When you get the engine free of its mounts and kind of cradled in the air, undo the bolts of that bell, drop it down under the car, and then the engine will lift straight up and out of the engine bay. You don't have to mess with swinging it or maneuvering it because of that engine bell, because it's a big pain. So if you can lose that thing under the car, and then you can lift the engine literally straight up. That's a lesson I learned. And once I figured that out, that made things very smooth. So like I said, if these engines are anywhere now from 30 years old all the way up to pushing 40. So everyone I suspect is going to start seeing gasket leaks, oil leaks, things like that. And if you're lucky, it's nothing too critical. And if it is, and you have to go to the stage of pulling the engine, take it from me, I am not a professional mechanic in any way. I'm just a hobbyist. I do this and I'm learning as I go. And I'm learning at the same time that none of this is all that difficult. So if I can do it, you can do it. Just have a good set of tools or access to a good set of tools that you can borrow or acquire from a friend or something, and just go at it. Mark everything, take lots of pictures so you can hopefully remember how it goes back together. An engine manual always is helpful in case you get lost. Then you kind of have something to keep you going, back on track and get you on your way. But that's it. So if you have a Gtv6, a Milano, or a 75, and you've got one of these Busso V6s, and you're having some oil leak issues, there's a couple places you can kind of check. And hopefully it is something easy to fix. And if it's not, you know, I can tell you that it's not the end of the world if you've got to pull the engine. You know, sometimes these adventures are a little bit fun, and then at least you can say, you know, when it's all said and done, you can say, hey, you know, I pulled this engine and rebuilt it myself, and you know, and then you know your car that much more, and that's something a lot of people I think are losing. So the more that we know these old cars and are intimate with them, the longer we'll be able to keep them on the road. So take pride, have fun, and if you have any comments or questions, shoot them on over. Otherwise, I'm done. I'm going to bed. Talk to you later.